right, so discovery is an iterative process. Just a little pre-promo here. We're doing a champions meetup next week with Apollo. Sam's going to be on it, and it's very exciting and going to be very cool. So we hope you guys will join us. I'll share a link in the chat in just a sec and also in Slack in a few minutes. But Sam, if you want to go ahead and take it away with where do you start with discovery?
Where do you start with discovery? So within the world of narratives, understanding what narratives do versus the discovery. Let's just quickly go over a model that we have called the quality faster model, the predecessor to what we now call single source modeling. I'm going to share my screen real quick. We have, if you think about software delivery and the model around software delivery, that's what this is. We found that this applies to the majority of organizations. This is version, I don't remember exactly which, but 24 or something like that. So it's been through the ringer in terms of seeing how organizations work, and then this gives us the ability to model the delivery system within an organization. And we've used it to great success at Zolvio to do that modeling and have a shared language that we can work with clients on. So to quickly go over what the model looks like, up here we've got this discovery phase where you have a lot of ideas, you do a bunch of research, and you come up with concepts being language and constructs to describe things. So it might be customer, it might be credit card, it might be shopping cart, it might be things like that. These have actually changed since. So call this, instead of domain behavior and component behavior, this should be requirements and specifications. So just hold that in your head. But other than that, everything else is the same. So then once you have an understanding of the discovery, once you've gone through discovery, the idea is that you understand your requirements, right? So the output of the discovery phase is that you understand requirements. And then once you understand your requirements, then you can come up with a solution. That's generally how people work. Now, it may look very linear here, like in terms of the process, but in reality, it's very non-linear. You start here, you go there, you go back here, you come to here, you go there. Like it's just how people work. You can conceptualize it as a linear process, and it's good and it's helpful because that's the general flow that happens within software delivery. However, just want to reiterate over and over again, this is a non-linear process, and that's why the circles go back and forth and back and forth. So we have discovery, which ultimately leads into a solution. And then the solution, by way of specifying the solution, specs, ends up with the thing being actualized. That is building, verifying, deploying. So each phase here has a little output. You got this discovery, produces requirements. You got the solution, where you model the world, the real world, into a digital form, be that a data model or a domain model. You have some architecture to make sure that the thing can be executed for the intended scale and so on. And you have some interfaces. They can be UIs, they can be chat UIs, they can be graphical UIs, all sorts of interfaces. That's generally your solution. And then you end up with a set of specifications. From just defining that solution, you've ended up with some specifications. Then actualization can happen. The output of actualization is that you have not only the product or service, but also the production system that created it. You then learn from that at your system, process, and product level. You gain some insights, and you go through the process again. That's what we now call the single source model. This is a slightly dated picture that I'm showing you. We'll update it. And the question then becomes about discovery and narratives. Like, where is the narrative and where is the discovery? Like, where does the boundary start and end? If you think about it, the narrative is really all about this here. It's actually this area. This is what a narrative is, right? It is the ability to go from requirements by way of a solution into specifications so that you can aid the delivery process. That is right here. This highlights where the narrative sweet spot is. And if you focus on that, then you say, okay, what's the purpose of discovery? Like where does the discovery come into the narratives? Well, the discovery comes in because it's the process that creates these requirements, right? So when we're talking about requirements here, that's the process that ultimately gets us to understand what the requirements are. And we do that through research, ideation, and conceptualization. But then once we move into here and we start going into requirements to solution, we're going to have questions. And I just said it's a non-linear process. And actually, that is the interplay then between these two discovery and solution phases, is that the non-linear aspect is what we want to take care of when we're creating narratives. It's I'm coming up with some discovery and I'm creating a solution, but that then questions my discovery a little bit. Hey, did I actually, like, we discovered something, but now there's some new information. We need to go back to discovery a little bit to figure things out. So there's an interplay here between discovery and solutionizing. Ideally, you'd get less interplay between actualization and discovery because now you're pretty far down the line. It can still happen. You can still have some late discoveries down here, which bring you right back to the drawing board. That has happened. I won't say that I've never seen that before, but in general, once you go through these phases, you get more momentum to go further into the cycle, right? And then once you're in delivery and you're actually producing stuff out the other side, you're doing less discovery on the thing that you're actually delivering. Just wanted to paint like a quick picture of what this model is that we use. And bringing it back to discovery and narrative's role in discovery, it can aid you in discovery if you quickly put it to the test. It's like, hey, I've got some discovery over here. I've come up with some concepts. We've done some research. It seems like it's a good idea. We've ideated, thrown away the bad ideas, kept the good ideas, researched them, come up with a few concepts, and now we have a set of requirements. Put it to the test. It's a bit like creating a spike. Put it to the test, write a narrative and test it. Write a narrative to test your requirement. That's what you can do quickly, and it can give you feedback on your discovery process very quickly. Let's put that into practice. Let's actually try it. Let's do it right now. Let's come up with something. We'll contrive it together here, and we'll try to build something like that, assuming we've got some requirement, which is going to create, let's see, something that people can relate to easily, a recommendation engine. All right, we're going to create a recommendation engine for our bookstore. All right, so let's just put that over here and say recommendation engine for bookstore. Okay, so that's the capability we're building out. And what we want to do then
Sam,
is,
swap your screen.
oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Let's try again. So I have just created a recommendation engine for a bookstore. That's a capability. And I'm going to go ahead and create a narrative that says the outcome of this narrative is that we want it to recommend similar books to users that they have previously read. Okay, so then let's open that up and start thinking about, well, what happens here? How do we achieve that? And so what I'll say over here is, well, the last moment that happens here is the user is recommended book. Give us a couple of books. What are two similar books here that people can think of?
A Brave New World in 1984.
Aha, 1984. Okay. And so over here, we're going to say that the journey begins, the user has read Brave New, and over here, it recommends 1984 by George Orwell. Great book. Seems to be happening today. But anyway, that's a subject for another day. So we go from here to here in this narrative, and we start to test this idea. How are we going to do this recommendation? Is it even possible for us to do recommendation? Okay, we're going to have to, the user's read it, we log the book the user has read. And then over here, we run the recommendation engine, and users recommended 1984. And so as we start to think about this, we might discover that, hey, how does this work? Let's open an action and say how this is going to do it. This recommendation engine. So this thing is doing some work for us. And then we realize this is too complex. I'll just pretend that we don't know how to do this. So then by going through the process, and obviously this is sped up and contrived, but by going through the process of solutionizing a little bit, it helps us test whether we can or can't do or can't achieve the thing that's being asked for. And that's super powerful. It's a very quick test that we can take to the team to try it out. So it's like a spike without code, right? It's just a thinking spike. Can we achieve this thing that we're trying to achieve? And it might be that this is looking good. Let's go back and modify. So then going back to this model, this helps us harness this back and forth. The thing that project management techniques today don't do very well. If I just take all of this and put it on a ticket, and that ticket goes into development, or it gets fleshed out more and more, there isn't a very easy path to go back to discovery, right? Like once it gets written down, there's momentum. There's a lot of tickets. There's a lot of docs that have been created. It's difficult to go back from that to the discovery phase. Whereas if you start with something that is over here, you've got something like this, you might upload some service design documents, you might plot out some service design over here about how this recommendation thing is going to work in the greater ecosystem. You're starting to put down what your discovery looks like. And then as you define these scenarios and these narratives, it's ultimately just going to help you have that to and fro very quickly between them. So yeah, that's the interplay between discovery and narratives, is that if you think of narratives as the mechanism that allows you to take requirements into specs, that's really the start of it here. We don't have to go all the way. We don't have to go all the way down to the specs. We're just taking the domain behavior, sorry, the requirements, and we are converting them into a sequence. And we're starting to loosely put the things on there that we think are risky. So I wouldn't call this a specification down here, but I would certainly call the order of things happening a kind of specification. Like what you consider traditionally as a user story is now being segmented into frames, and you're able to start to reason about it better just because it's been modeled in a time-based fashion. That's the interplay between requirements and, sorry, discovery and narratives.
Do a quick pause for questions.
Sure.
All right. In that case, do you have any advice for managing ambiguous requirements and the uncertain outcomes, especially as you're getting started?
Yeah, exactly that. Like ambiguous requirements. This might be, let's come up with an ambiguous requirement over here and see how this process helps with that. If we come up and say this is the recommendation engine for bookstores, I really got to stretch my imagination now. What's an ambiguous requirement here?
Build a toolbox.
Yeah, build a toolbox. What does that even mean? What does the build the toolbox even mean? Well, the first thing is we get the person that wrote this and you say, what's the outcome? Let's be outcome driven. Let's be focused on how, when the people who receive this requirement, how is it going to make sense to them? And the way we do that is by defining outcomes. So build the toolbox needs to be elaborated. I can't give you a discrete outcome and a discrete moment in time when something happens based on that statement. And so this becomes a collaborative effort between the people that wrote this and the people that are ultimately going to be developing these. And so just this framework in itself is designed to do that. It's by defining outcomes first and defining the final moment that happens in the outcome, it forces us there. So build a toolbox. Let's role play here. What did you mean by that? What kind of toolbox did you want to build?
Let's say it's a user adoption toolbox.
So build a user adoption toolbox. And what's a valuable outcome that can happen from that?
A valuable outcome could be that product teams available tools and practices.
Okay.
I guess that's a poor outcome.
It's getting there. It's getting there though, because like what this is helping us do is trying to reason about it. So one thing I just did was I split the original narrative to a capability. I shifted it up, basically. I moved it up because it seems like that's a higher level capability that's required, a toolbox. And then we want to get into the deeper outcomes that achieve that overall capability. So now we've got this build a toolbox adoption, build a user adoption toolbox, and then product teams embrace available tools and practices. So there's still some misdefinition in this, right? There's a capability that can be defined a little bit better that you can see here versus the outcomes that are required. So that's the first interplay I would create here is, okay, how can we define that better? What capability are we trying to build?
A capability might include training facilitation.
Okay, so let's put this here. Training facilitation. And you can see what I'm doing is just putting placeholders for things and translating this discussion into a structured capabilities and outcomes approach. And that is the exercise that helps you demystify the requirements and disambiguate them, right? So then that's one outcome that we can get here. Product teams are able to embrace tools and practices. So let's just change this capability a little bit. I'm going to do it on the fly. Adoption, it's tools and practice is adoption toolbox. So if we did that, if we called this a tools and practice adoption toolbox, we would use training facilitation to do that. There might be other outcomes that we'd want here to achieve. And that starts to hone in on the thing that you're trying to create and starts to structure it according to this approach where the capabilities and the requirements, sorry, the discovery and the requirements are being represented by these capabilities, and the requirements to solution is being represented by these outcomes. So we can go deeper into this here, but like just wanted to highlight, it's all about getting the disambiguation process is one of getting this area here to be defined as from ramblings to requirements, right? So up here, ramblings turn into requirements. And then over here, we're taking requirements to specifications by way of modeling things through time. Any thoughts, questions about that? Does that answer the question of how do you deal with ambiguous requirements?
Does that work? Sorry, does that work when the requirements are basically just technical? So far, we've been talking about business level requirements, but what if this tool has been used by technical people, maybe working on the back end or front end, and we're talking about maybe not quite algorithm, but at least system design and that sort of stuff.
Let's come up with an example. What springs to mind?
Nothing appropriate for this.
Okay, so something technical. Maybe it's something like cut down cloud hosting costs. Is that something that could work? And then we'll now get into, it's not necessarily user facing, but it's more like processes and things we need to do in order to achieve that. So one outcome would be that we are gain visibility into spending. Okay, so first we've got to see what we can spend and where the money's going. Another thing might be reduce or power down resources when they are not being used. So that's typically something you do. Teams goes offline, and like for the day, then you might shut down all the environments, and then just before they come in, you might wake them up an hour before they come in. That'd be one thing over here. We say the environment, the dev environment is restarted before the team arrives, something like that. All right, so it's just a case of describing with narratives and with time, what's the story? What does that story look like? What are those outcomes? How do we create outcomes by way of sequencing time to achieve whatever capability we want? And so it does work for that. It might also work for something, let's just try something slightly different. It might be like a hot topic of the day, quality control over LLM output. Okay, that's actually quite a challenge that people are trying to quite the challenge people are trying to solve today. How do you make sure the hallucinations and all of this don't go out of control? And again, over here, it might be like answer from an LLM is fact checked by another LLM. I don't know, something like that. And then we get into defining what that would look like. I do want to flag there is a limit to what you can do here technically. I'm actually really glad you asked this question. Like if you're building a compression engine, or even you're building the AI algorithm itself, is this suitable for algorithms? Probably not so much, to be honest, because unless it's something that's going to be collaborated on by many people building the same algorithm, it doesn't really make sense to contrive this time-based approach to describe your algorithms. You're probably better off just writing that in code. If you think about this as a left to right as a procedure, the code is also to a good degree procedural. And writing this in code is probably the better place to write it if there's not going to be this collaboration on the same chunk of procedure or the same narrative across multiple teams. This really comes into play when like you've got collaboration across multiple teams and you want the design, the system, and business context to all get on the same page. And so it's not very suitable for like dev tasks and algorithms and things like that. So I wouldn't build a game with this, and I wouldn't build a compression engine with this.
So this one's got a good example for this. How do you handle scope creep when you're doing these initial discussions? I guess for the cloud example, oh, we should negotiate a better contract. That might not even be the right people in the room. Or
yeah. So we do this right now, like in some of the work we're doing with our clients. As we're talking through a conversation and we're facilitating these narrative sessions, let's say we're going through this narrative over here and we're writing it out, and somebody says, "Oh, you know what? I just had this idea. What about not just powering down resources when they're not being used. What about dynamically changing the instance types? Okay, so let's just hold that thought. Dynamically change instance type. What you do is you make sure you capture it. Like scope creep is basically when people want, as the name suggests, more scope in the thing that you're working on. But you don't have to do it there and then, so long as you capture that you want to do it. And the same goes for any management technique, whether you're using this narrative-based approach to create your requirements or whether you're using tickets. Scope creep is a prioritization problem. And the first thing you got to do is make that thing visible and prioritize it accordingly. And that's really what we do here is, as we're going through these narratives, we just hunt for later discussion the thing that we're trying to create. So I might just say over here, I'll put a label, I just say future scope. Right, add that on there, and then just keep calm and carry on with what we're doing. Stay focused on the current outcome we're working on. And as soon as you say future scope, that's hopefully not going to creep in. So it really is more of a team discipline, like how much you actually want to produce as your next increment. And so I think I would ask the question, what is the most valuable outcome we want to achieve for the next iteration, let's say, and use that as your prioritization mechanism. And in terms of narratives, the tools available to you are things like labels, like this is high reward, for example, or like high ROI. I'll just put it there. And so if I'm adding that this is a high ROI, but this is not, then we should probably be focusing more on the high ROI stuff. So yeah, the technique and the tool, like the technique doesn't give you the ability to handle scope creep. That's a human thing. It's a bit like traffic lights don't stop cars, people stop cars. All right. But what we can do here is we can do traffic lights, right, to help you in prioritizing.
But I have a question, and I think it probably links, funnily enough, we're meeting later actually, about that discovery phase. I think probably experiences that many sort of even 10 years past, a lot of those sort of discovery phases were quite moon in the sky, or people would come to the solution first and things like that. I think a lot of the time now you end up, because of the introduction of product management, especially, and that being more and more prevalent within organizations, and that thinking is that a lot of organizations or those functions have journey maps and views on what they want things to look like already. So in a way, they've done a bit of, or if not all of that discovery themselves. And at this point, there's that point of scenario of where do you utilize all of that information that they've done? And some of the time they think they've done their discovery, and how do we link that into, so you create that kind of harmonious, you don't have to do loads of rework, but it's of linking in the narrative side of things.
So yeah, absolutely. Like that is all the conceptualization, ideation, and research that happens over here. You might have done it through service maps. You might have done it through jobs to be done framework. There's a million different tools that you can use here. And we're not trying to boil the ocean here with all of that. As far as narrative's concerned, like at least for the time being, this is where we're focused, but we do need a way to integrate with all that information and ultimately actually translate that information from there into this digestible form. All right, that's the practice there. So how do you do that? Let's say I've got my Google images, I don't know, cats. Well, service design. I'm not going to do cats. I do service design. UX. Let's look something like that. Let's say we've got something like this guy right here. So grab this actual image. I just want to grab an image of some kind. Copy image URL. Okay, perfect. That'll do. So I'll just do upload from URL, put that in. It's not doing it. Oh, that's because I'm running this local, but just assume that I can attach that over here. So I'll just pretend it's in here. I'll put this as a spec and I'll say this is the service design. And then I'll say that you can go find this over here. So the idea is we've got to link that information together. So we put that on here and we say, here's how this is where this capability here's all the research that's been done around this capability. And I would use this as an index to all the Miros and jobs to be done frameworks and any other diagrams and user experiences you've done and so on. You can put them all in here so that you have some context. And as I mentioned, we're not trying to boil the ocean here with the practice. Totally understand there's a million different ways that people do conceptualization, research, and ideation. It could be from PowerPoint to Figma to whatever. But once you get to here and you want to translate that into a narrative, and you want a narrative that ultimately is going to aid you in getting your design, business, and tech all aligned, right? This is the format, this is the approach that gets you to do that. Then it becomes a process of going from here into here, right? And now we can get into a practice that helps us do that, right? That's basically how we'd address that. We're going to build more and more integrations. Like the tool itself, it's going to have a ton more integrations, and there will be like the ability to draw ourselves here, so you can do some level of diagramming in here. So far, this is all about modeling. Like the constructs you see here are about modeling your requirements. At some point, we will put diagramming in to help with that approach as well. Flow charts, things like that. So yeah.
Related to this, like when you've got a big project that's spanning multiple teams, do you have any advice for scaling this and getting everyone aligned?
When you have a project with multiple teams, yeah. So there's a couple of ways to think about that. Like we've got different domains, let's say, working independently, then they are technically working independently and they should be thinking about their domain. Let's just say I'm on a different workspace. You can actually switch workspaces over here. So in fact, I'll do that. Let's say this is domain B. I'll create that workspace and we want to switch to it. And that's the problem of using localhost. It doesn't do that. So just imagine this was a brand new workspace on this side. And we've got another domain. What we're going to be interested on here is how we integrate with some external system. And we've got this narrative that is about this outcome A, and we achieve that outcome over here. But in order to do that, we need to integrate with another domain. So we treat them as an external system. And this would be domain B that we're going to talk to. And we create a contract and an interface with them, just like we would with two separate domains in code. You also can do the same in terms of your narratives. You're saying, look, my narrative stops here and their narrative starts here. We can do that. Now, there's nothing stopping us to import a narrative from another domain. We could probably think about things like that. We have to evolve it together with the community. And as we make this practice more prevalent, we're very early on that side of things, like integrating narratives across different domains. But certainly at a system level, that's a well-trodden path in terms of how you get two different systems to interact. You create clean interfaces between each other, and you communicate across those interfaces. And that's what we see already happening when we say this is one team that's responsible for this, but they're going to integrate with another team. This is team domain B, and then domain B would have their own narrative around this. And this allows you to have that common conversation. So that's one side of it in terms of like, how do you collaborate across teams? And the narratives themselves are intended to have you collaborate across teams. If this is the business context of moment one through to the final moment, and you've got the opportunity to say, this comes first, no, let's move this over, no, this comes after, let's swap this around. That conversation is going to bring everyone on the same page quickly. So you're going to disseminate information, high quality information quickly. And so bringing in another person from another team, say, hey, look, here's how we're going to integrate with you over here. And this is why. And this is the interplay. These are all the interactions that are happening that led to this moment. It gives you such rich information for you to understand what you're building and why and how to integrate. And even come up with ideas that say, why don't you do X? Why don't you instead call us over here with fewer bits of information? So it really facilitates that conversation, especially when you have the problem of scale. Because when you don't have this, the way you're doing it is, well, most likely relying on the glue people that we've mentioned before to be good at what they do and make sure that that information flows. And if they don't, you end up with the Eurotunnel problem where team A builds the tunnel this way, team B builds it this way, they meet in the middle, and then whoops, the tracks don't match. This actually happened, in case somebody didn't know that actually happened. It was billions in this project that were mistaken purely on inches versus centimeters or something like that.
Thank you for a sweet segue on this. Can you share an example from the field where iterative discovery led to a good outcome?
Yeah, we see in general, this is not something that's unique to NDD. Like iterative discovery and iterative development is really the core of Agile. Like ultimately, Agile said, hey, stop trying to plan the entire world in all the requirements phase, and then go into design, and then go into delivery. If you think about it, like what we're looking at here with this model, this wasn't invented in isolation. Like the rational unified process a long time ago was thrown out with the baby was thrown out with the bathwater there, I believe, when it comes to the rational unified process, because there was a lot of good wisdom in it. It was basically saying, if I remember right, like there was inception, elaboration, implementation, deployment, something like that. I can't remember the exact phases. So we see this pattern coming back over. And when Agile came in and it changed the face of software in a year to like around the 2000s, it really was putting more in the principles. It was saying working software over comprehensive documentation. That was the key piece that said, stop doing rational unified process, start focusing on delivering software. And that was great. And it made a huge impact. I think we still see that today. It started off a big change in the industry for the positive. And the outcome of that is that the systems being focused on delivery means that you have to be iterative. You have to be more iterative in your approach. You have to, if you're delivering software early and often, or if you're integrating early and often and you're releasing often, and the DevOps metrics since then, the DORA metrics, are all about how often you do deployments. We can see there's a trend towards just more software being deployed quicker to produce value to customers quicker. Therefore, you have to do everything more iteratively. You can't be spending a lot of time gathering specifications and designs and everything else before you get into the delivery, because you need to compete. And so those who can deliver quicker can compete quicker because they deliver value quicker. So it's that concept that forced the industry to start doing iterative discovery, right? Because the only way to get software out iteratively is to do everything iteratively. And so it changed the cycle. Instead of being 6 months in design and inception and 10 months in design and so on, you had to do all of this within a couple of weeks, and it's been great. And iterative discovery is necessary for you to keep moving at fast pace. So yeah, and then that's as a general trend and happening. That's what's been that was triggered by agile practices, and it's been going for the last 20 something years. How does NDD fit into that? It doesn't really change whether you're being iterative or not. So if you're a company that does iterations once a week, amazing, then you can use narratives. If you're a company that does iterations twice a year, like Airbnb does, actually, to my surprise, and it works for them, they do great. It's, again, like it doesn't preclude you from using narratives. Narratives is a means to communicate solutions and a means to go from discovery to solution. And so if you're iteratively doing discovery, you can iteratively come up with solutions. If you're batching them up into very large chunks and it's not as iterative, or your iterations are much bigger, again, the narratives can help you communicate that. So I'd say they're independent, but definitely compatible.
It strikes me that the narratives are a way to bridge from the complex to the complicated, being a forum that gets people to identify what are the boundaries between this component and that component, or this group and that group, where they may be unclear and super dynamic and complex. And we can say, oh, well, here's how we can enable the conversation where we can pin down enough things that we can treat this as complicated instead.
Absolutely. I love a good Cynefin reference. So this is the Cynefin framework. You got the 4 different problem areas, and things can be complex, where it might be a problem like, we want to go to the moon. We don't know how to do it, and it requires a lot of probing. So you can see they're starting with probing, then you sense response. So there's anyone who doesn't know about Cynefin, I highly recommend reading this. It's fantastic exploration of and understanding of problems themselves. And then once you get into complicated, then these are just practices like, oh yeah, this piece of code needs to be written. I know exactly what I need to do. I need to modify this cloud thing. I need to create this thing. I need to deploy here. Like, it's a complicated process, but there's a set of good practices around it, and you can know how to do that. And so we find ourselves in the world as humans constantly trying to turn complex problems into complicated, and then ultimately from complicated to clear. I guess that's what it's called now. They've changed it. It used to be called something else. Or maybe that's just me. But anyway, once we go into clear, then it's, oh, the light's off. Let me just switch it on. So it's just super easy. And so, yeah, there is a process of going from complex to complicated. And I think it's a great observation, Eric. Like, I agree, like going from the requirements, which can be complex because they're not really understood yet. And so you have to probe around. When we're doing that just a minute ago, and we're probing around. Hey, what does this tools and practices adoption toolbox even mean? Let's probe, let's ask some questions, let's figure things out until we get to a point where we understand the different outcomes. Once we understand the different outcomes, we start to lay them out. And it's exactly as you say, that is ultimately taking us from the complex world into the complicated world. That's a very good observation. Thank you for that. That's how you say it. Nev. FYI. Not sign of in.
Sam, can you talk a little bit about what done looks since you are iterating?
Yeah, absolutely. The easiest way is like this. You just say, this is in production, on prod, right? And it's done. And in terms of, again, this is something we ourselves are iterating on both in the NDD practice and the tooling around it and the narrative studio you're looking at. How do you know something is done? Okay, so let's say this whole thing here is done now. And then we want to make a change. So I want to add something in here. That should no longer be done, right? That should be changing into pending change or something like that. And we might add that title. Sorry. So it might be something like this. Again, it's not working for me locally. That's fine. But you get the idea. Like you can change the label. Now we are talking about branching. So now we're getting into how the feature can be implemented. And let's just talk first about how it like from a high level or from a concept, how it should work. The point is you've got something that you've gone through with your team, you've established the moments, you've established the user interfaces, you've established the actions, and this has been deployed to production. Great. Now it's deployed. You want to make a change to that. The code world, we've been doing that very well with Git. You make a branch in Git, you create a branch, you do the code. So now you have two versions of the code. You have what's on production, that's one version of the code, and you have what the developers are doing locally on their machines, and that's the next increment on that code. A similar concept is required here for us to say, you have something that's done, we'll just flag it as done, right? Or it's in progress, flag it as in progress. And you need the ability to branch and say, I want to make some changes to this narrative. So you create a branch, create the narratives, modify the narratives accordingly. Now you have what's on production versus what's being changed. And then at some point you can merge them back to, you can deploy that to production, and then the old one goes away. And now this is the new head, as it's called in Git. So there's a similar thing going on here. I'm actually seeing quite a lot in the industry, like some tools now that are using this concept of Git branching. I was using this financial modeling tool and they use branching inside of that too. I feel like it's one of those code concepts that's making its way into the products. And we're going to see more and more of those. And I expect we'll see that in narrative as well.
Awesome.
It sounded like we were talking about done being of learning. Like we have an output, but we don't necessarily have an outcome that's verified, or we haven't gone through that last step to see if we actually met a need for somebody.
Yeah, that's a great call out as well. If we go back to this model over here, we've gone through discovery, we've gone and created some requirements, taken them into a solution that is the narrative that describes the various components and specifications for those components and domains and so on. We've gone ahead, built it, deployed it, verified it, and it's now on production, right? That's what we got to here. I think you bring a great point. What are we doing about the learning then? Like, where does the learning kick in? So I know this question was never but let's ask the question. How does NDD fit into learning about your system and your process and so on? Again, we've been spending some time thinking about that, of how we can do it. Let me just open this thing here, this like outcome. Today, we just have this doc over here where I can be describing things like intended outcomes. Sorry, my keyboard's not working for some reason. Give me 1 sec. Go back to that. I think this is the risk we spoke earlier about using my local host to do the demo. Well, this is what's happening. My machine is not quite up to date. But anyway, what I wanted to highlight is that we can open up details about these different things that we're creating. And we envisage that we're going to start to put into here metrics. So like before we even develop this, what do we expect? What kind of KPIs do we expect to monitor? And what are we expecting in terms of performance or return on investment or any of those things? And we think there's a great opportunity here to define that ahead of time before you go into delivery. You go ahead and deliver them. And you can imagine that if we integrate analytics and reporting and metrics back into here, that say once something is actually out there and it's being used, we can get some metrics about its usage and so on. And then we can report that right back into these narratives. And we can start to pinpoint what's going well, what's not going well, and create this feedback loop and build it into it. So that's how we're loosely thinking about it right now. It's not in the immediate scope, but it's definitely something that needs to be addressed. If the narrative-driven approach is going to cover the entire SDLC, this is the model that we're using to do that. And we have to have an answer for this part here. It's a little early today to incorporate that in the tooling, but it's definitely something that's on the cards.
You shared a model some weeks ago where the words you used for these sort of four corners was discover, design, deliver, and learn. And you said you were looking for a D word for learn.
That's all right.
And it occurred to me that discernment or discern might be an option for you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. Discern, yeah. The other one I had was decode, but discern is good as well. So yeah, that you're absolutely right. And that's referring to this model. This is just a slightly out of date version. It's the 20, it's the one I pulled up from 2020. We have one from 2024 that has requirements and has those discover, design, deliver. So yeah, on the next call, I'll be sure to share that. But yeah, discern like that. Okay, any final questions, thoughts from anybody?
We'll see you guys next week for the Uncovering Uncertainty episode and also for Sam's Champions meetup.
All right, see you later.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
See you soon.